From your point of view, what would be the kind of pitfalls that people should try to avoid when they decide to launch their business?
Sure. The two common trends, as I said, is thinking you understand enough to build the entire product on day one. The nice part is, as customer development emerged, so did agile engineering, which is this notion of you no longer need to build the product monolithically. It's hard to imagine anybody doing a web or mobile app today to do that, but there's a key insight that says, listen, you should just be testing your hypotheses iteratively and incrementally, which has some interesting consequences about when do I launch the product or when do I raise money. When you launch the product is like after you have customers, not before. When you raise the money is when you could tell a story of here's what I thought, here's what I did, here's what I found. So then here's what I thought, here's what I did, here's what I found. And in fact is a narrative about your customer discovery journey. Boy, that's a really interesting conversation about not how right you were, but what you learned in the process of being wrong. One of the great mythologies about startups are, somebody graduates from Stanford and Harvard and then builds the right thing on day one and becomes a billionaire. See movie Social Network, Mark Zuckerberg. Turns out those are the rare exceptions. Most startups continually fail. And in fact, it's the ability to go from failure to failure while learning, iterating, and pivoting is what makes successful companies, not just being a genius on day one, writing it down on a business plan and executing. It doesn't happen that way.
And indeed, when you read a lot about entrepreneurship, a lot of the time people are always talking about those huge success, but don't talk a lot about all the iteration that people made to finally end up with a product that meets the customers. Do you have any example of a startup who was built on that way, starting from an idea and then moving on and pivoting and creating the final product?
Well, only two come to mind. I don't know if you heard of them. One was called Twitter, and the other was called Groupon, which are in the news today. And if you read their histories, they were essentially a customer development story. From what I understand at Groupon, there's still a copy of the 4 Steps to the Epiphany on Andrew's desk. And so, the smart entrepreneurs are not the ones so rigidly tied to the mast of the Flying Dutchman that says, this is my idea and I will, see it through hell or high water for the next 20 years. At least in the web and mobile space, I believe there's not such thing as a 12-year-old startup. There's a 2-year-old startup attached to a 10-year-old failure. And the failure is not being able to iterate or pivot. It might be you're too early, it might be whatever, but life is short. You ought to get multiple swings at the bat, not just spending your whole life on one idea. But now we're getting into philosophy. But my theory is, in 20 years you should have done at least 4 to 10 of these things, not one. That never worked.